Good evening, everyone. I think we might start the evening. I do like to try and be punctual. If we say a time, we'd like to. I think it's nice and appropriate to respect everybody else who managed to get here on time. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening and welcome you here to what I think is a very important evening that aims to share information, bridging an understanding between our community and the Coroners Court of Victoria. I want to thank Mohammed Mohadeen, who sends his apologies, who couldn't be here tonight. Some travel arrangements got mixed up and he was delayed on returning from his annual leave. But Mohammed heads the Multi-Faith and Multicultural Advisory Committee at the Victorian Coroners Court. He is committed to bridging the gap between culturally diverse communities and the coroner. And I thank him for supporting and coordinating tonight's meeting. I want to welcome Coroner Simon McGregor, Elise Doherty from the Coronial Admissions and Inquiries, and Darren, Cathie from Victoria Police. Tonight we gather as part of a crucial initiative to share information between the Jewish community and the members of the Coroners Court. Our community can be very concerned and anxious when our members and family are admitted into the Coroners Court. And tonight is designed to help demystify what happens there and for us to express some of our issues and concerns so that the coroners and those dealing with families can be better informed as to what matters to us. Let's draw on the knowledge base from our speakers as well as the experience we all bring to the table. Let tonight be interactive. I want this evening to be an opportunity for engagement, for us to learn and leave here better informed and better equipped to serve our community. If you have a question, please feel comfortable enough to ask it because it's likely someone else will have the same question and we can all learn together. Thank you again for all your presence and participation tonight. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers who bring a wealth of expertise to this evening. Firstly, I want to welcome Coroner Simon McGregor. Prior to being appointed as a coroner in 2018, Simon was a member of the Victorian Bar for 21 years. He was President Winnicke's researcher and a Court of Appeal registrar. He both practiced and published in administrative and human rights law, health and regulatory law, inquests, commissions, and proceeds of crime, among others. During his career, he worked on the police shootings trial, the HMAS Melbourne Voyager litigation, the Kerrang train and truck collision, and the parolee murder cluster inquests. As a coroner, he is best known for his work triggering the AFL to review its concussion policies, his review of the appropriateness of invasive CT scans in the inquest into the death of Peter Hickey, and his recent Indigenous death in custody inquest into the death of Veronica Nelson. Simon has also presided in over 3,000 other judicial determinations. Ms. Elise Doherty has a career spanning 30 years in nursing with a Bachelor of Nursing degree and a postgraduate certificate in critical care nursing. Most of her career has been dedicated to critical care areas, specifically the emergency department and intensive care unit. For the past 5.5 years, Elise has contributed her experience as a medical liaison nurse at the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine and the Coronial Admissions, and in the last 18 months has assumed the role as Assistant Manager of the Coronial Admissions and Inquiries Office. Elise's extensive experience and commitment to healthcare make her a valuable asset to tonight's discussion. I would also like to now invite Darren Cathie from Victoria Police. Unfortunately, I didn't get a bio in time, but I'm sure he has got a wealth of experience and knowledge that he'll be able to share with us tonight as well. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Coroner Simon McGregor, Miss Elise Doherty, and Darren Cathie.
Thank you, Simon, for that warm welcome. I'll begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the peoples of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal people who are joining us here today. What the three of us thought we would do, I think this is one of those talks where we're going to learn as much about your community as we can teach you about our community. But we thought a good way to do that, so you can just jump in whenever you've got a question, because if we run you through a day in the life of the Coroner's Court and how it works, because unlike any other court you've ever talked about, we are a court that never closes. We're open all the time, and we have, as you'll see from us talking up here, we have this fantastic. It almost seems a bit misleading to call us a court, because yes, it's run by judges. We're judicially independent, but here we have all this medical expertise and all this investigative expertise, and that's all in the one building, and it's all in the one program. So people around the world that know something about this say the Victorian model is the equal best coroner's court in the world, and we've been doing it this co-located way since the 80s. So since then, some other institutions, only a few, have copied us, because it takes a lot of resource commitments to put all these teams and all this multidisciplinary stuff together. Why are we doing that? And to come back to Simon's point, there's a great introduction here about the community and what you will all do for your communities at what's the most difficult time in people's and families' lives. You know, death is the window frame that marks the boundaries of life, and there can't be a more profound moment. And what that opens us up to as a society is a moment of reflection, a moment of perhaps motivation. Can things be done better? Did things end the right way? And Parliament, in creating this task for a judge, a judicially independent person with constitutional independence from government, hospitals, businesses, to look at the circumstances of this person's death, figure out some stuff that experience has taught us is important, make sure the identity's right, get the cause of death right, but also now in the modern coronial mission, I should say, because it's a long story, but the coronial institutions existed for almost 1,000 years in the English legal system. What in the modern coronial system we are able to do is getting the certainty around who's died and what they died of. We've then realised there's these public health consequences and public interest consequences where we can understand in society why and how people are dying, at what ages, in what locations, and what of. And we can design a hospital system, and a road system, and a police and corrections system that best suits our needs if we look at how people die. And so to come back to which ones go to the coroner and which ones don't, there is a definition in the Act of Parliament, and you don't need to remember it. If you've got any questions, Elise wants you to ring her and ask her and her team. And we really like that. We don't die wondering, which is pardon my choice of words there, but ring and ask. We like people to over report into us, and we'll set you free if you don't need to go. But in plain English, unexpected and unexplained deaths are the ones that are reported to us, and then also people that are vulnerable because they're in care or in custody. So we want those people in care and in custody because they weren't free to leave, really, when they're in a closed environment, and we can help you work through definitions of what's care and what's custody. Because they weren't free to leave, we want to check those deaths very carefully. And then the point about the community well-being and the community being touched by deaths is when a death is unexpected and unexplained, people very naturally have strong reactions to that. So 99% of what we do is in the end say, I know that was unexpected, unexplained, thanks for letting us know, it's okay. Now that we've looked at it, we are medical experts, expert investigators and expert judges, we can tell you. It's peace of mind, that's what the person died of, that's when they died, and we've got those circumstances. So we know also in the bigger public health picture in the state what's happening with mortality in Victoria and that sort of stuff. So that's mostly what we do. But in 1% of the cases, perhaps, we find, as we review all that stuff, the way that things could be done better. And one of the reasons, again, we're one of the best coroners' courts in the world is we have experts in all sorts of spheres working in with us. We don't have to go out and find someone. I've got a paediatrician, I've got a geriatrician, I've got emergency medicine people, I've got public policy people, I've got expert different police investigators for motor vehicle collisions, all this sort of stuff. We get all that together before we come back to the families and say, now we can tell you what happened. So that's kind of why we do it, and that's why Parliament sees and agrees that the politics of it are obvious. Death touches so many people, and if you have a rational, independent system that gives the community confidence that these sad moments are being looked at carefully to see whether there's a way, the silver lining is we're never going to bring the person back, but can we do this better? We look at every case from that prism, and as soon as we can, we get you on your way if you're one of the 99% of the cases, but we've got to have a process to check things, and that's what Parliament's told us to do. So so coroners aren't out there on patrol with finding dead. You've got a duty to report a death to us, but then should we start with you, Darren, about how that happens and then how that gets reported to Elise?
Yeah, from my perspective with Victoria Police, I'll just clarify a couple of things to start with. I work in a unit called the Police Coronial Support Unit. We're a unit of police, sworn police members. We're about 12 members strong, and we really liaise between the wider frontline police members, general duties and detectives, etc. Within the broader police force. We liaise between them and the coroners, and also staff from Elise's office, which I'll just refer to as CA&E, tonight Coronial Admissions and Inquiries. So a lot of our work is really, we're called a support unit, so we support both the coroners, Elise's staff, and also the police members in the overall investigations. For the broader frontline members, who are the ones who are actually attending the death scenes, typically they will get a call from someone who believes that a person is either dead or dying, or an incident has occurred. And you can imagine quite often it might be, as an example, a road fatality. As Coroner McGregor mentioned, unexpected deaths are part of the remit of the coroners. So all road fatalities, as an example, are unexpected deaths. So if the police attend a road fatality, and typically ambulance staff will be there present, and the ambulance staff will actually verify that the person has passed away. Typically, if I just take at the scene as an example, the police members will then do an investigation as they would do in any normal scene that they attend, whether it be a crime scene or an incident scene, or in this case, a road traffic collision. Once the death has been verified by Ambulance Victoria staff, the police will then typically contact Elise's office, and they will start the coronial process with a case number, and the police will then take details and prepare what we call a report of death for the coroner. And that's pretty much a 2-page form, and that's what actually, I like to say at least, initiates the coroner's jurisdiction to investigate that particular death as being an unexpected death. There could be many number of circumstances in which police are attending death scenes. Quite a common one is residents who don't get out terribly often, but their neighbours haven't seen them for quite a while, and we'll call that a welfare check. And someone in the community or a family member might call the police, a family member who's not local, as an example, might call the police, can you go down and do a family check on my family, a welfare check on my family member. It's not, it's sad but not unusual for police in those circumstances to find the person deceased in their own home. And that will be the same scenario quite often, is the ambulance will be called to verify the death, and then contact will be made with Elise's office to initiate that coronial process. The police will then do a report of death for the coroner. In essence, Elise's office, then I'll let her explain this, but she will her office staff will take it from there, and police will do an investigation as to the scene, and other specialist police units might attend the scene to process the scene. And then over to you, Elise.
So what my staff do, my staff are nurses as well as executive assistants. So we're the ones that are there 24/7. So if middle of the night we get called anytime by police at scenes of death that Darren's described, but also by doctors in hospitals, or it might be nursing home staff as well. So it could be a nurse in a nursing home or a doctor in a nursing home. So what we do is listen to that report from the person that's giving it to us, and based on that information we'll decide whether or not we're going to take that immediately as a report to the coroner or not. So if it's not immediately reported to the coroner, that would be in cases where it might be someone who might be older, has a lot of medical conditions, and we think, oh, the GP might be able to sign a death certificate here. So if that happens, then we wait to be able to talk to the GP to see if they're able to sign that death certificate.
Could you speak a little louder, please?
Yes, they can. Thank you. Cases where it's immediately reportable to the coroner, that's when we start that investigation. So if it's a police officer, as Darren said, we would ask that police officer to complete the report for the coroner, and we would transfer that person into the coroner's care. So that's at the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine. Then what we would do, we gather in like medical records if we can, and then we prepare that case for the coroner. So every Monday through to Friday we have a coroner who's on duty with us, and on a Monday that coroner will have 45 cases presented to them by a specialist doctor. So that would be a forensic pathologist, the different has quite a few. So we have 3 doctors on a Monday, and every other day we have 2. So those doctors will present those cases to the coroner, and then the coroner makes a decision about how that investigation is going to proceed from that point. So all the way through this process, my staff are calling families, giving them information, checking in with them, seeing how they're going, giving them the opportunity to give any information to us that they need to or would like to. So in those instances, we're asking families for like past medical history, things that they want the coroner to know about the care the person's received, or if there's any sort of religious or cultural requirements. So if there are religious and cultural requirements where we need to process a case very, very quickly, once we know about that, then we prioritise that case.
I'm thinking this might be a right moment to jump back in, because so Elise has been working in the team, they've been working overnight. The coroners are actually on duty for 24-hour periods, rolling periods at a time every day. They go on at 5 o'clock at night. But by sometime mid-morning, there's a triage meeting. So Elise's team have been hearing these reports. That's an inquiry, that's information, that's definitely a report. That body's coming in, that one doesn't need to come in. And all that's happening, and literally bodies are moving in and out of our fridge system. And we're building up to a triage meeting where the pathologist, with the benefit of all the medical records that Elise has got in, we've spoken to the family, because there's always stuff that's not written down, as much of that information as we can get. We have a triage meeting, we go through all the cases, and the pathologist says, who by then has usually run the body through a CT scanner, looked at the external body, knows has seen some photographs that the police officer's taken, has seen the one-page form that the police officer filled out, has heard something from the family maybe. The pathologist can say, yes, I know the cause of death in this one, I'm going to write a report, but that's quick. Or this one, I can't tell. From all those things, not many coronial services are lucky enough to have their own CT scanner, and it's one of the, in many ways, that's an expensive bit of kit. In fact, we've got an even fancier scanner coming online. I won't. It's great.
You will be very excited.
Well, what it means is we have to have, there's a lot fewer autopsies than we used to have to do, because now when you know how to read those machines, you can see, oh, there it is. That's the sort of thing that kills you. And the pathologist can explain that to the coroner. Say, all right, we know what the death is here. We don't need to keep this body any longer. That body can go straight back to the family, the funeral home. And though in that triage meeting, the pathologist says, I can't tell, it needs an autopsy because of these things. And what type of blood test does it need, and that sort of stuff. So then the coroner takes that advice in our legislation is the coroner makes a judicial common sense causation decision. It's not a medical scientific one, but that is expert evidence that's highly influential on the coroner. So, you know, mostly you are doing what the pathologist says. Then you give those orders. Now, if you want to cut open a body, that you need an order of report to do that, and it's got to be for a public health purpose and that sort of stuff. So we have the triage meeting, and then I need to tell Elise's team what the orders are. So this body can be released straight away, this one needs an autopsy, and then Elise's team. Then so we have the triage meeting, and then I'll throw back to you. What happens then?
And then so the rest of the day, so the morning will be contacts with families, telling them what's going to happen in the meeting, getting their opinion on an autopsy, because Coroner McGregor and his colleagues will take the family's wishes into consideration when they're making that decision. And then the afternoon is giving the coroner's directions to the family and explaining them what they are. And then, yes?
Well, is it automatic that if the GP doesn't sign off on a death certificate, it will automatically go to the coroner's court?
Almost, yes. It doesn't have, if no doctor of any sort will write a death certificate, yes. Then that's still, we call that unexplained. Even if it wasn't unexpected, that's unexplained, and usually we'll do the explaining. But as Elise's description was very good there about the way, if there is a doctor around that might be able to do that and save everyone the bother, we'll keep it in the, keep it in the holding pattern until we get to the bottom of that. And it's a resource thing and it's a time thing, so we don't bring the bodies in if there is a GP that might, or some sort of doctor that might be able to write a test.
And so your CT scanner has actually probably minimised the number of cuts.
Yeah, I think the veterans say it's certainly taken off more than a third, and maybe it's halved the number of autopsies they used to do. So it's made a big impact.
So how many autopsies would you do? Like what percent?
Yeah, at least
Yeah,
good question.
We were talking about this yesterday. So
Actually, let me say how the volume of work that we do, and then Elise did work out the autopsy thing. So we do 7,500 cases a year. That's unexpected, unexplained deaths in the state of Victoria. So you've got 13 coroners, so we do just under 600 each a year by the time 13. So I'm on duty about one day a fortnight for the year. So every day that I'm at work, if I don't close 3 cases, I'm probably going backwards on my new ones coming in. And at any given time, I have about 300 on the go. So now some of those, like the Veronica Nelson inquest, if you saw that in the media, that's one case. That was an inquest for 5 weeks and all sorts of written submissions and that sort of stuff. You've still got to do the other 599 cases. So you triage them as carefully as you can, making sure that you do your job, that we're giving people peace of mind when it is all clear, or if we find ones with systemic errors, we're drilling down into it. So that's it. So 7,500 cases come to us, and at least what's the autopsy figure?
So for the year 22-23, it was about 31.6% of cases had an autopsy. So around that 1/3 mark.
And it's a dropping number.
It's going down.
The rest is sorry.
So the rest is CT scan.
Sorry,
Is
say
the
again.
rest CT scan or
The other
Yes.
6,000, 5,500.
There is a small category that are so well documented in the hospital or the nursing home that we don't even need the CT scan. That's a small percentage, but yeah, most of the rest are external examination, so the expert and a CT scan plus whatever records we got around. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm sure this question will come up and you're probably leaning towards it just in Jewish law, if an Orthodox family, was that something you're going to talk about? If an Orthodox family don't want the autopsy due to religious reasons?
Yeah.
So
we
do
do-
you come across?
In that first call that we're making to families, which is usually the day before the coroner's going to hear the case, or sometimes the morning of, then we'll ask families at that point how they feel about the possibility of an autopsy. So that's where we're relying on the families to say to us, even if they don't want one because they just don't like the idea of it, like you get the opportunity then to discuss it with one of the nurses, tell us what your feelings are, what your wishes are, and we relay that to the coroner so that they can take that into consideration.
And literally what the Act of Parliament says is that you shouldn't perform an autopsy unless it is necessary for your judicial function. Necessary is a strong word. In fact, it was a Jewish case that went to the Supreme Court about what that word means. So the practical, every coroner has their own interpretation of that, but they are very rarely are autopsies forced on a family that doesn't want it, because we can get to a cause of death which is unexplained. We can also, though, say, look, the insight that might be gained here from an autopsy, if I'm trying to persuade you, is there might be hereditary information about a heart history or an inherited condition, and it might help the family, even though you'd not prefer it. But we would not force that. I, as a coroner, wouldn't make a family that had a religious objection do it. I'll just offer them that information. If they say no, we're fine, we won't. The only time I've done it in the Jewish community was I had in a care environment, in a home, a disabled person died of a condition that might have been an infectious disease, and other people in that home were exposed to it, and some of them were workers going in and out to the community. So we had that exposure of others and a real public health risk. And by the time that was explained, that family understood and didn't. Their power under the Act is to appeal to the Supreme Court. But I would make the order. It's an order. We're going to do the autopsy. That family and the community leaders they were talking with understood and didn't appeal for that. So that's an example. It was really where the risk has become one to other people rather than just the family. That's the moment at which you probably need to protect the community. So we, on our day then Elise and the team are working through the aftermath of the big triage meeting, and we're starting to move bodies and get the mortuary ready for the autopsies that we're doing and that sort of stuff. And that's the medical investigation. And mostly in the funeral community, this is the bit that you need to know about, because once those processes are finished, be it a quick CT scan or an autopsy where we've got to prep, they're done in surgical theatres and it's got to be recorded and documented, however long that's going to take. There is also simultaneously a legal investigation going on for it. So at this point, having told Elise what she needs to know to manage the body, I simultaneously then start talking to my legal team, who's talking to the police officer about the type of things we think that the investigation should cover off. And really they look a bit like shopping lists at the start, but it's a motor vehicle death, it might be an overdose, it might be a suicide. It's all maybe at this stage, but we start with what's the most obvious pathway based on what we've seen at the scene. And then there's a communication back from the coroner to the police officer. And so, Darren, when the coroner says to the police officer, this might be an overdose, and I'll give you a list, what do they do then?
Yeah, so that, I suppose to sort of generate that pathway, the police have already done a lot of work talking to witnesses and family members, gathered evidence at the scene at the death scene at the initial stage, and that's how the coroners and Coroner McGregor sort of come to that pathway to then go back to the police and ask the police to actually investigate sort of more on a long term and more in depth than they would be able to do at the death scene itself. So the coroner's team, in essence, writes a letter, and we call that a brief request letter to prepare a coronial brief. And by this stage, a coroner's investigator has been assigned to the case. Typically that will be, for obvious reasons of knowledge, previous knowledge, the person who actually attended the death scene and made the original report. But for various reasons of expertise, knowledge and resourcing within Victoria Police, the coroner's investigator might be a different person to that which attended the scene. And one example is a drug overdose case. So a general duties or uniformed police member will attend the scene and process the scene, but the investigation has to be undertaken under Victoria Police policy by a detective. And that is because they generally have greater experience, they have greater training with investigations and in-depth investigations, and a broader network of avenues of inquiry that they can undertake during the investigation. And one of those is looking into the medical background of the person, because it might be a prescription drug overdose. And so they would investigate the prescriptions and the reasons perhaps that doctors have been giving prescriptions. And they would quite often speak to the deceased person's family. Almost virtually every case, the coroner wants a background of the deceased person, sort of to get to know the person and make it real, empathetic sort of a scenario. So we're not just dealing with names on paper, etc. We like to get to know the person and what made them tick, so to speak, and what their lifestyle was like, because that can give us some good indicators of then where to investigate. Sorry, you had a question.
And so from what I understand, what you're describing is sort of the two elements of the investigation. There's sort of the medical evidence that you're gathering, and then sort of the police evidence that you're gathering to create the brief. Once the medical evidence has been obtained, is the body then released for burial while this investigation?
I was thinking it'd be good, now you see that sort of triage process, we'll come back and tell you the time frames. So Elise,
Sure.
what can you say about that?
So someone would need to be in the coroner's care with us for anywhere between about 3 and 10 days. So we can move quicker than that under certain circumstances. If we're not going over a weekend, for example, there's no public holidays, we'll move a little bit quicker. If there's no autopsy, we move a little bit quicker too. So, there's been instances where, you know, the family have been very, very keen for release, and we can move through in 24 hours.
We always, Elise always tells me when there's a cultural significance on a particular case, and then we know what our judicial roles are, but we do the culturally significant ones at the top of whichever pile they go into. They go straight to the top. So we do everything we can. We understand enough about the communities to know it's particularly timeliness is everything, and we literally do what we can without shortcutting the job. The other time frames are though that the average coronial investigation lasts 8.5 months, but that's a misleading statistic because 50% of them are really quick, and so whilst bodies might be released in a couple of days, within 3 months, whether it's a simple one-pager and I don't need to get the police officer to do me a brief of evidence, really the medical evidence is enough. Those ones will have that report by the pathologist written up and out the door back in an average of 3 months. The ones that take longer might be where there's a full investigation needed. We're going to an inquest hearing, maybe it's complicated by criminal charges or something like that. Those ones may take 2 or 3 years. There's a work-safe investigation about how someone died, but that we've got to protect that person's right to silence, so we have to wait, and all these sort of things. In the end, they may take 2 years, and the average out of those is 8 months. But in reality, 50% of the cases, you'll know within a few hours. The coroner will have said, yeah, it'll be simple. It's coming back to you. And with a smaller cohort, we're going to have a deep dive into what the circumstances were. Still, when we do that deep dive, in 19 out of 20 of those cases, we can still come back and say, it makes sense, here's what's happened. We give you you can have all the evidence if you want, or you can just listen to our summary of it. And in 1% of those, we might find a prevention opportunity, which means we think we can do this better. We better hear from the doctor, the hospital, the nursing home, the jail. We've got to give everyone a chance. It's got to be a fair hearing at that point, and that's why to give everyone a fair hearing is what takes longer with the cases that aren't a straightforward answer. But all the way along, we're triaging it to let people go as quick as possible. Sorry.
I'm just asking, when you say you're triaging, I mean, obviously the Jewish community, most of them would want their family members to be triaged to the top, but I assume there are other communities or other people also want their family members triaged. I mean, is that a lot of juggling that's happening?
Yeah, but we manage that. Yeah, and I think that's just a credit to how well you guys get it organised. To me, it looks manageable. Elise makes miracles happen.
There's lots of different reasons that people want things done quickly as well. And another type of case is that we prioritise are children. So we have to move through children as quickly as we can and
some autopsies themselves are very time critical. What you're going to see is sort of no point doing that one in a week, but that one can wait. That one's already, so she takes all that on board too. The coroner doesn't say anything about the scheduling and when it's going to be released and that sort of stuff. That's all Elise's team. Simon?
I know that in order to effect a release, you need to have the senior next of kin. Can you talk me through what the hierarchy of senior next of kin are? Because that can sometimes be a bit confusing and convoluted in certain circumstances.
It does get a little bit complex. So firstly, we would be wanting to speak to that person's spouse or domestic partner. If there isn't a spouse or a domestic partner, a child or children over the age of 18, then if there isn't either of those, we move to parents. Then we move to siblings, and then we move to the executor of the will. So where it can get complex is if someone is still legally married to a person but separated and they have a new partner. So that can get a little bit complex. In those sorts of situations, we would defer to the coroner and we'd ask them to make the decision about who the senior next of kin is for that.
Meantime, Elise and her team ask both sides to say, here's the 10 questions the coroner's going to have, tell me your bit, show each other your bits, do you want to reply? And then the coroner gets that bundle and makes a determination as to who will be the senior next of kin.
And what's if there's only children?
If there's only children.
Yeah, I'm saying, in other words, there's no spouse, there's no whatever, but the senior next of kin are children that don't agree.
So they would both be seen as, so let's say there's two, they would both be seen as equal, senior next of kin, they both get a say, they both get all the information, they both get the telephone calls from the nurses. Where it becomes tricky would be if one wants an autopsy, the other doesn't. And also if one wants they both want to plan the funeral. Again, coroner makes a decision. So we get all that information in and coroner makes a decision.
An important point here to just explain, judges can never give what's called advisory opinions. So whilst we're trying to explain our process to you, I can't tell you today what might happen in the future because that has to be decided independently on the circumstances of those cases. But they're a tricky one. They take up a lot of resources within the court too. So we're not excited about it.
No. I mean, so maybe from our point of view, communally, is not that obviously we try to manage it as best as we can. Is what would help, obviously, us doing our job to be able to effect a funeral and preserve the rights of this of the deceased, but also managing his. I mean, can you give us any advice on how we could help the situation?
I think getting families to agree, funeral directors, you're so good at doing that because people might have different ideas about how they want the funeral to look, or you might get siblings who are estranged and they can't agree. And we understand that. We work with them as best we can and advise them as best we can on how the best thing for this person, the parent that's died, is if you can work together. It's when the coroner gets involved and makes that decision.
That's you're quite right, Elise. When I was a barrister trying to advise clients about this, I would be telling them, look, it's better, even though you guys don't want to talk about this and you don't want to agree, it's better that you control the situation now and come to an agreement rather than you hand it over to a judge that doesn't know either of you and that judge is going to make a decision. So keep control and work together now. It might be, two siblings that don't agree that Uncle John is a smart guy. Well, we'll go with whatever Uncle John says we should do. Like all those just sort of family law dispute resolution kind of techniques that you would use. Keep the control yourself as a family rather than get a stranger to decide.
Compromise.
When somebody dies in hospital, what circumstances does that call on the coroner?
Yep. So plenty of circumstances, and we, again, Elise's team always says, when in doubt, ask us if it's reportable. So we'll sort that out. So if you die as an unexpected result of a medical procedure, that needs to be reported. So And the doctors are quite conscientious about that, and also, I mean, it's protective for them if they don't know quite what happened. It's transparent to the family. So when in doubt, they report it. But for instance, if you are dying someone's dying on the surgical table, there's only one thing that might say to him, it's a long shot, we're going to have a go, we do it, and the person dies. That's not reportable because he's dying anyway, and that doctor that was doing it will say, that's what he died of. I couldn't save him. But if I was doing a minor procedure and something went wrong and died unexpectedly, that got a report.
Can I ask you about the transport of the deceased? So generally, is it the coroner that send out a van to bring a deceased? Does the Chevra Kadisha bring the deceased, or how does that work?
It's our contracted funeral directors. So in Melbourne Metro and Geelong area, it's St John's Ambulance who actually do that for us.
So the reason I ask is because one of the things that we try culturally do is to stay with the body as long as we physically can. So obviously if they hand it over to the coroners, but if there could be transport or even any parts of the process where we could stay involved in that, is that possible? Is that only through the contractors? Or?
We have had like extreme situations where usually though it's something like someone's passed away in the back of an ambulance on the side of the road. The funeral director is going to take hours to get there, so we've let the ambulance bring the deceased person to us. But most of the time we do need our contractors to come to you, entrust us to take care of your person.
But your question is about the continuity of cultural care.
Yeah. And someone being with
Can I offer some advice? Call the coroner and ask them. They'll either say or they'll say no. That's what you got. So it'll be case by case, but you'll try.
And I think I've been on duty one day when a Muslim family asked a similar question. I think it was in Mohammed's tenure. It's a shame he's not here tonight.
Yeah.
He could probably give us from the Muslim answer. But yeah, when in doubt, ask us. Sir?
In a situation where the coroner makes a decision, is the family able to legally challenge that decision?
Yeah, there's rights of appeal set out in the Act. So you have a right of appeal. If you don't like the autopsy decision straight away, you've got 48 hours to appeal that. And then if you don't like the finding, so that might be my one-page short answer, or you might have waited 8 months and you've got a 10-page description from me, you have a right of appeal for that for up to 6 months after the coroner hands it down. And before that, you can have any of the information that you want to read through. So that's the appeal pathways are set out in the Act.
On a lighter note, I may have been watching too much television, but harvesting of parts for university students still go on or not at all?
Well, not unofficially, but we do. We coordinate through Elise the organ donation system, because Elise and Darren, the police, are terrific at not waking the coroner up overnight unless you need to. The reality is that organ donation, like this person agreed to be an organ donor, it's an overdose, probably some parts of their body are healthy, some aren't. You have to ask the coroner's permission before you release all that stuff for organ donation, because I can never get the heart back or the eyeballs back or that sort of stuff if we let them go off to their therapeutic purpose. So there's a process around that Elise curates, and when it's ready for the coroner, you either ring them up or whatever the coroner's doing. If it's during the day, you come in and interrupt them and go, organ donation, this is the new top of the pile.
Could you tell us a bit about that?
About the organ donation process?
Yeah.
So you can only be an organ donor if you pass away in hospital. So you have to be in hospital.
What car accident or roadside?
Yes, yep. Could be car accident, it could be an attempted suicide, it could be multiple different reasons why someone is dying. Overdose is a really good example as well. So that person would be in the intensive care unit of a hospital. They would be either brain dead or thought to not have a good neurological recovery. So they're going to be severely affected by what's happened to them, and then the family have made that decision that they want to go through the organ donation process. So that's where Donate Life come involved. They're an external organisation to us. they work in the hospitals with the families, with the doctors, and assess the patient to see if they can go through to organ donation. So if organ donation happens all the time where the coroner's not involved, the coroner only gets involved if the case is reportable to the coroner. So in those circumstances we described, like car crash, overdose, attempted suicide, those sorts of things.
But sometimes overdoses, taking a lot of drugs often causes a heart attack. Whether you've died of an overdose or a heart attack with drugs in your system is something that's hard to work out down the track if we've allowed the heart to be donated. So in that split second, the pathologist has to get woken up first and give me some advice about whether we might need a heart or not for this one, and if we definitely don't because it's got hit by a truck, okay, you can have a heart.
Can I ask a question for Darren? Do deaths that occur in hospital that are reportable, police are called? Police need to write a report?
Yeah, not always, but most commonly police get the report originally actually from Elise's office, and we do the report of death for the coroner because we then will contact family members, which at that stage typically Elise's office staff members don't have a lot of background information of the person. They've only got the report, some brief paperwork from the hospital, but not any background information about the person. And as I said earlier, in those sorts of cases, it's the police report that's, if you like, initiating the coroner's jurisdiction to investigate.
So I mean, I painted a fairly typical case that we deal with regularly, and that is family are in hospital or have been called to the hospital because mum's died, dad's died, and it's reportable. Family are all there, and doctors are all there. It might have been known, they had a fall prior, whatever the case is, it's reportable. Does that, does the CA&E require a police report before they can then move to the next step or next stage of, handballing it on for the triage meeting?
Yeah, I'll
Most cases.
probably let Elise answer that.
Most.
But the police often in those circumstances won't actually attend the hospital.
Right.
Because it's not like another death scene where there might be, in a house or on the roadside or what have you, there might be other evidence to be gathered. In the hospital, there's not typically evidence that the police can gather. Medical evidence will come later.
So how do you do the report, or how do the police actually do it?
A lot of it's based on the information from the hospital.
So no need to talk to family?
They can still talk to family, quite often get background of the person. Yeah.
So going back to the typical case, where 2 a.m. We get the call as the funeral home, mum's died. It happens to be reportable. She's a 95-year-old who happened to have a fall 2 weeks ago, so it's going to get reported, but she's got a long medical history, so it's clear as to possibly why she was maybe in demise anyway. It'll go up for triage in the morning. Will not getting the police report impact the release being able to be effected later that day if it's all obvious?
Yeah. With hospital deaths, any doctor that's reporting to us, we take as reportable, they have to do a report for the coroner first. That's what the police are then basing their report on. So that report has a lot of medical information in it. If police need more information from the family or the doctor, they'll go and do that, then they'll do their report for the coroner. But we do have cases where we don't need the police report. So our low-level falls program that we've recently expanded that you would know about. So they're people, typically elderly, who have fallen and injured themselves, and that injury is significant and part of their cause of death. So there may have been a fall and a broken hip, or they've hit their head and had a bleed in their brain. So if it's a fairly straightforward situation, then we're able to leave that person either in the care of the funeral director or the hospital, and we can move through it a lot quicker. We don't need to transfer the body to us.
If they're in the care of the funeral director at that point, are we then permitted to do a burial, or we still have to wait for
you have to wait.
clearance?
You have to wait.
And that's for us to check. Like, you might think we know why this happened, but until we check, we can't give you that peace of mind that whilst the frail person has had a fall, Was she being looked after properly? You know, that sort of, all those things, that's what we check.
That was sort of a
Takes
lead
a bit
on
of time.
question that I had before, was from an administration point, we've got a MCCD from a doctor and we register the DRS with first deaths and marriages, and then we might get an email a month later from first deaths and marriages saying this is being reported to the coroners because the doctor's written female rape and hip or something like that. So at what point then would, from the family side, could they be receiving a full death certificate so they can continue on with whatever they need to do?
It does
with
delay
that?
that, yeah.
For what sort of period of time? And are you in contact with the families? Is it funeral parlour responsibility? Is it first death and marriage? Who talks to the families at that point when they're waiting for the death certificate so they can
We do talk to the families if they call us information. So usually that process, that BDM process, is BDM have got, as you know,
Birth, deaths and marriages,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
registry.
they have a team of doctors who review all the death certificates. Any that they're looking at that they think, oh, the coroner needs to review that, they refer that to my office. So at that point, what we do is we get a copy of the death certificate, we get the medical record in as well, we'll request that, and then one of the nurses will review all that information, they'll write up a report that's then reviewed by the pathologist, so the forensic pathologist. That forensic pathologist then presents it to the coroner, and the coroner will make a decision at that point about whether or not it's reportable.
Whether we accept it as a report, and then whether we need to change that death certificate, whether we actually need to start a whole investigation, you know, or a lot of times the pathologist can just tell how the GP with the death certificate got it wrong, and we can fix it, but sometimes, no, we need to look at that now.
Because the family's first instance is to contact us as the funeral parlour going, A, where's the death certificate, or B, I've received this email from BDM, because we get a copy as well as the funeral directors, and they're worried.
Yeah.
So, contact the coroners.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
absolutely fine,
Yeah.
yeah, we're happy to speak with them.
Yeah.
And in those circumstances, does the coroner have the authority to order a body to be exhumed? Like, is that sort of
We do,
your
it's very
power?
rare, but we do. We can have a full investigation at any stage. But that's pretty rare. Like exhumations, there's not one a year. They're really quite rare.
And assuming police have done a welfare check, arrived, found somebody who's clearly been deceased for some time, we generally record the date of death as per when that person was found to be deceased. If through any forensic investigation it's been determined, are you able to determine with some level of accuracy, and then do you amend date of death?
We can. That's very complex. Yeah.
It's very difficult to say. So most of the time, from a legal point of view, the date of death is the date that that person was found deceased, because that's the date that we know for sure they definitely passed away. And there's so many factors that influence how we change after we pass away. So medical conditions that the person had, weather, you know, is it hot, is it cold, whether the body's in water. There's so many factors, so it's very, very difficult to say death occurred 3.5 days ago or 6 hours ago. That's
So in short, you don't.
But the
We
coroner
hardly
can.
ever. We can.
You can, but you don't.
We hardly.
Okay.
It's hardly ever compelling enough evidence to change it from what it is.
Because we have, I mean, culturally, we place a lot of significance around the date of death. And so therefore there's obviously anniversaries of, and we do certain things around anniversaries of, and etc. So if that got amended, then that'd be relevant for us to know if that actually got changed.
Fairly, well, it depends when the evidence gets, if you're going to amend it, again, that's very rare. It's usually amended pretty quickly, I think, on what we know, but every now and then may not be till Darren's team have done a full investigation.
But it's unlikely and rare.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Cool. No,
Yeah,
no,
I don't reckon. Yeah, I reckon there's maybe
Okay.
one of them a year, maybe. Any other questions out there? And I guess to either of you guys.
Yeah.
Got any?
I was just going to say, just sort of to extrapolate on the time frames on which some of the cases might end up being closed if they are an investigation. So from the police perspective, if I take as an example the case I referred to earlier, like a road fatality, there's quite often a parallel, what I'll call a criminal investigation. In other words, you might have a deceased driver in the vehicle, but the other driver might be at fault for the collision occurring. So in those circumstances, you might be prosecuting or charging that offending driver with various offences. It might be culpable driving or dangerous driving causing death. And the coroner's investigation is sort of put on hold, and they generally don't complete their investigation and their findings until the completion of other court processes. And that could be the criminal case, and that might end up going through the county court for some of those higher offences like culpable driving, which can take years. And there might be civil cases go on as well, which can also delay the coroner's processing, completing their investigations. And part of that, as Coroner McGregor referred to earlier, is around about admissibility of evidence is different in different jurisdictions, and not holding the right to silence for an accused person and those sorts of things. So there are those cases that do take years to close.
What happens to the waiting line?
Sorry?
What happens to the deceased to be live?
Oh, so in such a long investigation, that those processes don't change in terms of their time frames from Elise's office perspective.
We still release as soon as we possibly can, and the investigation continues on after that.
Either we've kept the CT scan, or we've done the autopsy, we've recorded it, but the body's released as quick as possible.
Yeah, all the medical information regarding the investigation into the cause of death itself is completed very
In a rare case, though, you may not have a cause of death for a while, but we do always do what we can to give you one, including an interim cause of death. You know, we will hardly ever leave nothing on the record, because that's very difficult then to deal with the estate and that sort of stuff.
We've just come out of the sort of summer holidays, and it can happen that the GP is away, so she's not contactable. So what happens in that scenario where the GP would write the DC, but they're not here to write the DC, or maybe not contactable, and what happens?
If no one, it's unexplained. If no one will write the death certificate, you've got to send it in. So
Right.
Elisa's team would say, will you please ring that doctor on holidays?
Right, yeah.
Scan them some records and see if they'll do one. So otherwise, the family gets put to this bother.
Can anyone if they worked in a clinic, can anyone in that clinic write the DC on behalf of
A
that?
locum can write it if the locum, as a medical practitioner,
They are so scared, beyond scared, to do any of that.
Yeah, their insurers
If they
don't
haven't
help.
seen them as a patient, they can't write it.
They can write. Yeah, they can write that
GP as per.
Yeah,
There might be enough of a clinical picture in the notes.
They can write that they've referenced the medical records. So
Is there
another.
something in writing that we can present to doctors that might be hesitant in writing, something just to give them a bit of confidence to say
Yeah,
yes?
and they can always talk to us too. So we do this
Regular.
dozens of times a day. So it's a lot. In the death certificate, it says, did you examine the deceased body after death? They can say no. Did you provide care? They actually can say yes at that point, but then they can go on to say that they've referenced the medical record. So a colleague in the same clinic with full access to all the information can legally do the death certificate, and there is no issue in that. Not from the coroner's court and not from birth, deaths and marriages.
No, we know that. I think I know that, but
You do know.
I do know that, but I'm not the one writing the DC. I'll be more than happy to.
Time you can start learning how to write.
Exactly. Just need to do a bit more training.
That would save time. I need a guideline from you guys. I'll just call you.
Sorry, my name's Sharona and I'm a social worker counsellor. You were a counsellor, yeah. I just wanted to know about if there's any support available for the family through the actual coroners.
Absolutely, there is. Yeah. So the coroners, we call them the flows. So they're the family liaison officers, and there's a team of them in the court, and they support the families all the way through. Yeah. So they're social workers.
It's tailored. It can end with referral to psychologists for grief counselling, but certainly they will just talk you through in plain English what's happening here and timeframes, and we do our best to keep continuity of the same flow, keeps coming back to that family during their experience.
So if our responders go out and there is a I'll always follow up on cases and things and just link people into different services, but it's also
Right.
good to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there another question?
Does your team, who are, I suppose, or the medical experts, do you have the staff or capacity to have like same-gendered practitioners working with the deceased?
If families request that, we can do our best to try and provide that. So we always work with families with whatever they need. So if that's something, honestly, my mum always says to me, if I end up with you, I want a lady doctor. So I'll be calling my own office.
My mum said.
Yeah. So let us know.
Yeah.
It's a good
Up right at the back.
Just wondering what can we do as a community? I guess there's obviously a great understanding of the need to expedite and to do things as quick as possible. But as a community, what can we offer back, or what can we do to help that process? And
I would say that explaining to your communities what you've learned from us tonight, that's the best thing that you can do to get rid of misunderstandings. I think half of the, call it friction, that we have where is families not understanding what we're trying to do for the greater good in Victoria, for their own good of their family and that sort of stuff. So the fact that faces that they trust in their own community are the beginning of the education process for them is the best that we can ask for. Thank you.
And one of those misconceptions quite often is because the police are involved that there is a crime. The police investigate crime. But 90% of our work is that. Coronial investigations for police only amounts to around about 1% of our work. Sometimes there is a crime, but just because the police are investigating, we investigate on behalf of the coroner, as directed by the coroner. That doesn't mean to say there is a crime, and that's probably a very important message from Victoria Police's perspective and our members.
Thank you. I've just got one last question.
One more. You come back to you, Simon.
I'm sorry, I understood this was obviously a very good presentation. But I'm just curious, how do you just the personal impact and effect of dealing with death? You know, how do you process that? What does it do to you?
Some days are worse than others. The stories that you hear are often very, very hard to hear. All of us have got experiences of crying with families on the phone, crying with families who have come in to identify their person. And sometimes you just feel powerless as well, because you're listening to families tell terrible stories at the worst time of their lives. And it's a privilege to be able to be there for that person and to share that with them and to try and support them and give them information. That is what I get out of it as well, being able to support a person and to provide information to them that somehow just soothes a little and takes an edge off what is just the worst thing they're going through.
Searching for pleasure.
Yeah.
Do you have counselling yourselves?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. We have access to psychologists that we go and see. So if there's something that's really sitting with us that we're struggling to shake and become. But we've all got each other as well. We all, we debrief with each other and we sit down and we go, that was really sad. So yeah, it's a good supportive team.
Much the same way we all do.
Yeah.
And just a side thing, so the system that you have in Victoria, is that replicated around Australia at all, or it's just Victoria?
No one else has got it all co-located together. Yeah, and there's a lot of inefficiencies that happen when you're not. When I want to speak to Darren, I know where to find him. Elise, we bump into each other, and I also have got the pathologist right there. But, everywhere else in Victoria, when a coroner wants to speak to a pathologist, they have to write a letter, send it, wait for a report to come back. Whereas we can have a conversation and then figure out what we do.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
It's a bit nice in where other states don't.
It's really expensive. You've got to put a court and effectively a medical facility near a major transport hub. So, and we're in South Bank, but so you've got to put it. You need freeways, helipads, police, doctors, surgical facilities, courtrooms. So it's really expensive. But there's an interesting backstory. it came mostly out of how Victorian forensics botched up the Lindy Chamberlain case,
Yeah.
and that became an international embarrassment.
Yeah.
There were some great academics and thought leaders here, and a sympathetic government that said, right, what's the best practice model? And they came up with this co-location multidisciplinary thing, got the legislation, the money for it, the site, and we built it. And there's one province in Canada that has eventually copied us 10 years later, and New South Wales is getting close. But yeah, I'm not saying we put it on the tourist poster next to the penguins in the Great Ocean Road.
Why not?
It is something to be proud of here in Victoria.
Maybe just two sort of more operational. Sorry, did you want operational questions? Again, let's take the case that often happens: a 2 a.m. call, passed away at home, long medical history. Doctor's not going to be contacted at 2 a.m., but it's not going to be admitted. It's been reported, but it's not admitted. You guys will say, wait for, speak to the doctor. We talk to the doctor at 8 a.m. and right. Are we able to bring the patient, the deceased, into our care in that interim period, or does they have to stay at home, or what?
No, they can definitely go to the funeral director.
They can go to the funeral director,
Yeah,
waiting
absolutely.
for your further instruction.
Yes.
And if the doctor says no, we're not, I don't know.
We can
what?
transfer him from you.
We'll go.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's our inquiry cases.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
that's that question. And question, maybe not so much a question, but maybe to see whether or not there's any facility or way with regards to police investigations. We recently had a case that the person remained unidentified for a couple of weeks because a range of things. Being a community gives us a lot of knowledge to be able to tap into. I also know that there are police chaplains, and I know that the chaplain function is specific, may not be that related or relatable to the work of the coroner. But I wonder whether or not there's a way or a function to be able to plug into the Jewish chaplains in cases that are going to be released to the Jewish funeral homes, whereby they can then network within the community to try to help you guys identify, learn some information, blah blah.
I wouldn't say no, but there's no opportunities.
The question is, how can, because all we get is maybe we'll get a constable on site. So I'm dealing with a constable from wherever, police station, and they're on duty, they're off duty, they've written their report, they're not, etc. How can we work together to improve that process? I don't need an answer right now, but I'm saying
I'm thinking about almost taking that sort of thing offline. So to speak.
Yeah, correct.
And send me. I think you've got my email. Send me an email, and whether it's through Elise's office. But we would certainly like to assist.
Any clues that we get.
And so would we.
Exactly.
So would we.
As you often, one of the issues that we have, and certainly the coroner's initial inquiries that are made by police through Elise's office, one of the difficulties we have is actually getting members when they're working, because of course they work 24/7, night shifts and all that sort of stuff as well. It can be really, really difficult, and that can create, unfortunately, delays from time to time.
On some cases, the judicial determination about identity is really hard. It's one of the most Sherlock Holmesy parts of the whole job.
Any last questions? All good? All right. I just want to say thank you again for all of you attending, because I still learned things tonight, and I want to give a big thank you to our three presenters tonight for taking the time out of their evening. And and for me, this, and for all of us, I think this should just be the beginning of our opportunity to be able to have broken down some barriers between our community and the Coroner's Court and the different departments and elements of the Coroner's Court.
Simon, can I jump in to say, it's not a memory test. We have a website with FAQs, and Biffam did a terrific YouTube video series sort of explaining the different stages. So that's that. If you Google that stuff, you'll be refreshers and reminders and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and again, and as I think Elise and the others have commented, they're there 24/7. So if we've got a question, if any of us have a question, we're not sure about what to do or how to do or what the way to process, you just ask them and they're more than happy to help.
When we can't sleep at 3 o'clock.
They need someone to talk to at 3 in the morning, so it works well for everybody. And thank you once again, and hopefully we don't have to use their services, but I want to thank them for the service that they do for our community and the wider community. It's valuable, and without being too light about it, they don't want the cases as much as we don't want them to have the cases. So we're all working together for the best outcome, and the more that we can cooperate together, I think it's a good outcome for all. Thank you again.
Thank you guys for having us.
On a lighter note, a Russian friend died out of a thing called SDS, sudden death syndrome. Very good, very good.